Evening, everybody. Scott Stevens here. Welcome to the show, Another Perspective, where here at Metadime Network, we've kind of taken an advanced look at some of the issues that are facing the country. We're kind of out ahead of the pandemic thing, where we just could see these things coming a bit of ahead of time and not so worried about, what others going to think of us as we anticipate what is arriving. And the pandemic is just one thing. There are many, many issues immediately ahead of us that some of us may be prepared for and others not. And I'm going to anticipate that the bulk of us are not ready for this. It's going to be an exceedingly great challenge for us to get through this literally civilization-changing couple of months that are straight ahead of us. So I'm going to call the show just down the road. And we'll start with this. And because that's what we're doing, is looking down the road. Whether you're a truck driver, a mom taking the kids to school, going to the grocery store, we take a trip on the road. And we get in a vehicle that we believe will transport us there safely, securely, on time, and to be able to get us home once again. And where we are is looking at a road where we don't know the foundations of. We don't know if there are potholes. We don't know if we can hit a certain speed, cruise on through September, show up in October, whether there are potholes ahead of us, whether there are detours, or maybe the road's just out, that the bridge from here to there just doesn't exist, and we have to find another way through. I think all of these are options and experiences that we're going to have to face in the coming 5 months. 5 months because I've chosen February as the end. By February, a lot of things will be known and settled, and we will have gone through some probably very profound, spiritually awakening experiences. We'll have gone through them individually, as marriages, as families, as neighborhoods, as states, and as nations, and then ultimately the broader view as humanity itself. Because even if one nation goes through something, it impacts those farther down the road. So let's just start with this. What world-changing events might be approaching during the next 5 months? What in the news are we not talking about? What are we talking about and that we're just glossing over? We're glazing over. Yes, this is happening, but it's not a concern. It's not something you have to worry about. It's like going to the doctor and you've got something wrong. And they say, well, you've got the flu. Give me a call in the morning or give me a call in 48 hours when you know there's something much, much deeper afoot. So in September, and I got a list. I probably should have broken this up into a couple of different slides, but nonetheless, I think these will be the highlights for September. Unrest in American cities. It's happening. It's been going on for 3 months. And it is encouraged right now by the media and unseen influencers. For 4 years, we have had the press telling people, I don't understand why you're not in the streets, why people are not uprising over the injustices. Why aren't you out there protesting? And now that they're out there, and now that we're seeing a Kenosha, a Minneapolis, a Washington, D.C., and oh goodness sakes, New York City, all by themselves, we're seeing this unrest on a nightly basis in these cities. And that's impacting the businesses in the cities, but it's also forcing those that can to move. They're leaving these cities, and these cities inside of a year will be a shell of their former selves. So we have the media and unseen influencers working on unrest. The global economy obviously remains on the edge. We had the crash that began in March and indeed began in the credit markets September 16 of last year. We're coming up on the first anniversary of that. But the Fed, through duct tape and a printing press, has enabled keeping that system afloat and the plumbing cleared. The Chinese flooding culminates with what I see will be the Three Gorges Dam failure. I see that failure probably inside of 3 weeks' time, unleashing a series of cascading events that will likely lead to Chinese civil war or, at a minimum, a military coup sponsored by the internal communist China, or the CCP turmoil. There are many factions inside of any single party. And that turmoil has been brewing, and I believe the Three Gorges Dam failure will allow that to come to the surface. And of course, there's plenty of blame. There's a lot of, a lot of graft, a lot of corruption, and all of that will be swirling around the CCP. And unfortunately, it will probably cost the lives of millions of Chinese people. And that will be on display for weeks as the dam unloads. And then we see all of the economic issues downstream, the power that goes dark that had been relying on the 1 terawatt hours of power created by that dam. That comes offline. So there's going to be a lot of knock-on effects. So then what we'll see is a clear resumption of the downward contraction that'll rattle holders of debt who now realize that China can no longer power the world's economy forward. That cog has been taken out of the global economy. And then we look to insurance companies and reinsurers. Those insurers that insure the insurance companies will face insolvency from the Three Gorges Dam failure. And that sends shockwaves around the insurance world. Early frost and snows hinder European and North American crop harvest. We've seen this for 2 consecutive falls now. We'll see if this year is a third. The jet stream is kind of coiling up to let this happen in the next 3 weeks. And of course, confidence in all governments continues to erode. It doesn't matter what talking face is out there. It doesn't matter what they say at this point. The distrust has gotten to the point to where they're just not believed. Doesn't matter what party, nobody believes it. If you can't lead with a clear majority and a vision that everyone can agree with, then your confidence in the mandate to govern, as they say in China, the mandate of heaven, once that is evaporated, then the confidence is gone and it's game over. And then I see further restrictions imposed on the free exchange of ideas, information, and opinion. This approaching an election in the States, but certainly because of COVID, is being manifest in many other, what I see as the Five Eyes countries: Canada, the United States, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, those that have intelligence sharing operations. If they can control the flow of information in and through those 5 countries, a lot of data, a lot of scenarios, a lot of information does not get to the outside world. So that is something that I think we'll see more and more weight and restrictions put on. And then presidential debate coming up on September 29. How does Biden handle that? If it becomes apparent that he isn't capable of leading, what happens to that Democratic ticket? And then they would have to find a replacement for that candidate. And just this story that came across this evening, Facebook threatening users and publishers in Australia, one of the members of the Five Eyes Alliance, saying that they could be blocked from the platform as a result of a proposal in Australia that would force big tech to pay for carrying the content of news groups. Facebook would be reluctant to stop allowing publishers and people in Australia from sharing local and international news on Facebook and Instagram. But if the legislation becomes effective, that might be an eventuality. And what it restricts, this law restricts, is content producers getting paid for having their content shared on these media platforms. So what Facebook would have to do is simply just withdraw entirely from New Zealand, or have the ability to filter out all news groups, YouTube stories, essentially all created content from the platform, and then it could become only your personal page, your personal discussions, a social media rather than a news or information sharing platform. So it would require an entirely different algorithms to deal with this edict from Australia. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, so let's get back to it. October arrives now after the first debate. I think we'll see in October a bond equity sell-off ultimately turn panic. If the Democratic infrastructure begins to break or crack, or they realize that we need to retool for the election, which is but a month away, then that brings in a huge element of uncertainty into the stability of the United States. And at this point, the Federal Reserve is no longer able to paper over the now deep structural flaws in the debt fiat system that have now infected the rest of the planet simply because the dollar is the reserve currency. This then leads to a rapid, almost instantaneous, a one-day affair, collapse of the U.S. dollar, seizing up the global banking system. Cash and coin rapidly become scarce. Because if the banks don't have connection to the outside world to communicate with each other, we're all going to end up in a barter system. What you have on you is what you have on you, and the ability to exchange with others. We use cards for so many things that there simply isn't the cash and coin in circulation to replace that kind of transactional economy. It does not exist. So with what then would result in, and probably a precursor to, would see the rapid appreciation of safe haven assets. AK gold and silver would probably disappear almost instantaneously. They would be scarfed up by those who had access to those markets, to those gold and silver shops. People who have the money would go in and get all they could. What that leaves everyone else for is either junk silver and digital currencies. But they too would go to the moon. And then what has also been a part of the agenda is roving gangs, mobs, and others of like mind begin to spread more violent protests as the election nears. This would happen deeper into rural America in the continuing attempt to influence the election. These actions would likely be and have been stated by as a prelude for national or nationwide election day interference. This would create a reasonable doubt as to the actual winner. And if we can have one side that wants to vote only by mail and the other show up with identification at the polls, and if you can inhibit those from going to the polls and then flood the mail-ins with your ballots, then there's reasonable doubt. It can happen both ways, but either way, there is an agenda behind this to impact the election, because the prize of the executive office is a grand prize indeed. Continuing through October, we'll continue to see a rise of COVID cases. That explosion of cases has begun now. As we try to get back to work, as we send the kids to school, more and more cases. And this will happen as people spend more hours every single day indoors. Will also become apparent as the success or failure of the harvest. That will be known as we end towards the end of October. Last year, it was the second to third week of October where the snows came and Canada realized that a large portion of the wheat, the rapeseeds, those later maturing crops would not get harvested. That North Dakota had to abandon 15% of the corn crop in the field and ultimately became unharvestable. Food lines grow as populations grow ever more hungry. Food banks continue to fail as the food shortages amount due to the increasing need by the population. The Three Gorges Dam failure cements long-term global supply chain interruptions. We see and realize how many factories, how many little parts of this, that, and the other were only made there, or when you assemble a motherboard, when you assemble a wiring harness, that was the only place where those single products were sourced. Or where there are others made, they simply cannot keep up with the new demand. We would likely see China-India conflict, or Taiwan-China conflict, or Vietnam-China conflict. Ultimately, economic wars usually end in hot, kinetic wars, meaning shooting wars. The one other thing that is curious is Taiwan. That if the Three Gorges Dam goes, and because the United States lost access to the Philippines, that there wouldn't be an overt play for Taiwan, calling Taiwan an independent nation and then recognizing Taiwan as an independent country apart from China, where there has been this one China policy for the better part of 40 years now. That it seems the administration would turn their back very quickly and aggressively on China and recognize Taiwan, and that would allow America still a foothold in that Chinese strait. I would look for that to happen. All right, now we're in November. Regardless of who wins, the election brings no clarity, just more anger to this process. Undoubtedly, with already seeing these cities burning, Washington would now become the focus. People would ring the Capitol building and the White House would ultimately be under siege. And then no one who agrees or disagrees with the mob would be safe. You have to comply with mob mentality or risk your safety. If Trump wins, undoubtedly there would be assassination attempts on his life. This uncertainty in American politics and the future of this nation, this largest economy on the planet, would ensure that no Fed policy would be able to stabilize the currency, the U.S. dollar, the banking system, the confidence in the system, or any proposals put forward to the citizens. Deflation of once mighty assets, I'm talking Apple, Tesla, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, the S&P, houses, those things which have required debt, and the amount of margin debt out there, once again, to bid up these assets is astronomical. So as these inflationary assets that have gone up crazily just since March even, as the buyers disappear for those assets, the money goes to the needed assets. Hyperinflation would then ravage basic needs: wheat, flour, bread, milk, those things which were accumulated prior to the pandemic or at the beginning of the pandemic. So those who have stored up for that event will then need those supplies, or at least be able to have them in their stores at a relatively reasonable price. All through November, then winter deepens. An unresolved election will be stuck in the courts. Could there be a unifying event? All right, back to the election law, the nation's 133-year-old law for picking a president. You would think that's back to the Constitution, wouldn't you? Well, I guess something has come up since. So this 133-year-old law for picking a president has a provision that has never been needed to settle a disputed election, since it deals with a situation that would only happen after a cascade of seemingly improbable events. But then again, this is 2020, the year that feels cursed with historic worsts. An election law expert warns Congress would be wise to clarify the provision before the country potentially faces a worst-case scenario, a full-fledged constitutional crisis, if there is no clear Electoral College winner on Inauguration Day on January 20. So, if you're asking the question, what should Congress do to prepare for November? What would be at the top of the list? Said Edward Foley, a constitutional law professor and director of Ohio State University's election law program, who has written on the provision and hosted a recent online expert roundtable discussion upon it. The situation calls for a dose of procedural preparation than panic. So let's talk about this thing ahead of time. The odds of the worst case scenario right now seem incredibly low. Yet this year has already seen the third presidential impeachment trial in U.S. history, the worst pandemic in more than a century, and deep partisan divisions about the country's future. President Trump has more than foreshadowed the possible disputes to the legitimacy of the November results because of a heavy shift to mail-in ballots during this health crisis. It's a swirl of ingredients that some election law experts fear could, as unlikely as it may seem, make Section 15 of the Electoral Count Act of 1887 relevant again. So this paragraph was called at the time almost unintelligible, and the year after it was passed spells out how Congress should count Electoral College votes. The problem starts if a state submits two different election results in the House and Senate clash. The U.S. House and the U.S. Senate clash on which result should be tallied. More later on the dominoes. But if that does happen, there are conflicting interpretations of the law that requires Congress to do so. It's an ambiguity that he calls the Achilles heel of the Electoral College system and the Congress's role in counting these votes. So what happens is which vote from the state gets certified. There is either Congress would count the electoral slate backed by the governor of the state, or in the other reading, it would be backed by the Congressional Research Service report from 2001, is that the state's electoral votes would not be counted at all, just thrown away. That unused provision remains untested. So what would happen is that we would contest the mail-in ballots. If they're not there, if they're not counted election night, and we can open up the receiving of these ballots for an undetermined amount of time, then if the vote was certified or at least counted, as say in this example, Michigan voted publicly and the popular vote went to the Democrat, but then the ballots keep coming in, and that would change the vote one way or another. It would be up to the Congress, or actually the governor, to certify one or the other, but that doesn't mean that Congress has to accept that state's late vote. So it's not crazy, Foley said, to imagine two different electoral results from a state that is critical to the outcome of the presidential election, or even a group of states that is critical to the outcome. He said the law now lacks full clarity and doesn't address the situation. So it's something that we have to keep in mind, that there could be this legal wrangling that goes on behind the scenes. Good to see you guys over there chatting this up. Yeah, there's a lot to get through here. So as we end November and the election's still not resolved, come December, there'll be a plan to instill the Speaker of the House as the president until there's a proper legal resolution of the election. So we would have almost two transition teams, one to the Biden team or the upfront team, one to the Speaker of the House, and then the standing government of the Trump administration. So then might the difference between a democracy and a constitutional republic be on full display as the results of the election continue to be contested? There is a difference. We've declared ourselves and we've gone around the world instilling democracies, when in reality, we're a constitutional republic that has a democratic aspect to it. And the constitutional republic was instilled to keep mob rule at bay. So we still haven't certified the election, and this usually comes on the second week of December. States have now passed laws since 2016 that bind those states' electors to vote the way the state voted. So they have no leeway to go to Washington to certify the election, to look at the candidates, whether they're the ones that survived the election or not. They're now bound to follow the state's election results. So what this leaves is really a bit of chaos, not even a little bit of chaos, a lot of chaos in the situation, a lot of anger and animosity. So what do you desire? There will be many who continue to seek to just burn it all down, and others that seek a conversation, a compromise, an understanding, and a way forward. And again, what can unify the nation? January. Two transition teams attempting to continue to outmaneuver one another to gain control of the power-heavy executive branch. And I think this will continue past Inauguration Day. That means by default, the Speaker of the House would become the de facto president. Such chaos, such deep division, hatred, anger, and distrust brings about a massive natural disaster. And I see that one morning it would be so great, so devastating that it would humble the entire country. Finally, in the wake of this event, some quiet and reflection about what is truly important. This event is so large that outside help is required to render assistance, to bring in medical help, safety, and security, and has been talked about for decades. The UN is now here. That went back to. So in the wake of this event, an emotional, a moral, an intellectual, and even a greater spiritual clarity now becomes apparent. It is universally chosen by all Americans to choose to let go of the old system, with all of its components of government, financial, fiat currency, medical, educational, regulatory, military, judicial, and law enforcement, benefits and deep, deep flaws. All of these need to be and will be completely retooled. The nation, now deeply humbled by this act of God, attempts to come together. Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2021, postponed. The nation hangs now in a precarious place. So for the first time in 3 centuries, it knows not what lies ahead. Occupying soldiers, an economy, but a shadow of what it used to be. We're now presented with the now humbling task of rebuilding what mobs just weeks ago couldn't wait to burn down. Instead of seeing only blue or red, Democrat or Republican, the color of one's skin, or the presence of privilege, whether real or imagined, all of that is now gone. We just now see that we need each other. A new leader emerges from the ashes of the old, a new George Washington, a new vision of what inspires each and every one of us. This new leader takes the oath of office 2 weeks late. Late, but just in time. And now together we can travel down a new road. I've never considered a difference of opinion in politics and religion and philosophy as a cause for withdrawing from a friend. That from Thomas Jefferson. We're not going to get through this unscathed, without scars, without troubles, without looking and figuring out a new way to do things. The inequities that are out there are real. The inequalities in money and in opportunities are real. But we're not going to overcome them with anger. We're only going to overcome them with understanding, with discussions, but with imagining a future that we can all participate within to the best and the greatest of our possibilities. I mean, the Constitution says that we're all created equal, and in some regards that is true, and in other regards that is completely false. None of us are equal. We all have different goals, different ideas, different potentials, different drives. Some are lazy and some are active. Some will be content to sit back and do nothing their whole life, while others just cannot stand still. So we're different, and we have to celebrate that difference, because it is that difference that makes us great. And so in seeing the differences as a weakness, we need to see those differences finally as strengths. And that will get us through the rebuilding that we're not done yet tearing down. So we've got a long way to go, and I'm excited to get there to the other side of this drama, because that is exactly what it is. All right, a couple other shows we got here on Metadime. The Coffee Break Show with Vicky every Monday through Friday at 11 o'clock Mountain Unlocked with Tracy Wilson, at least at Mountain Time, 6 o'clock on both Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then my show here on Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 o'clock Mountain. You know, we've got a road ahead. We're all going to have to travel it, and it's best that we all learn to get along and discover what we like about each other rather than seeing the differences, rather than pointing fingers and blaming at problems, rather accepting that there are problems and discovering a way to build on those differences. Because there is a way to accomplish that together as a nation and as a people. This is not a task that's too great. And that's kind of one of the greatest things is we're never tested beyond our ability to endure. And these are great lessons that we will endure and learn from. And these lessons can be then sent down for generations to come. All right, I'm Scott Stevens. Thanks for sticking in here and watching. If you're catching this on replay, hit hashtag replay and let me know where you're from, just the city, so we can kind of gauge where the numbers and what they represent. We can do it. I know we can do it. We haven't had honorable leadership in so many generations that it's almost painful and surprising that we've made it this far. We can do this. We can get through this and create something worthy of the Statue of Liberty on the other side. All right, everybody, hang in there and keep looking up.